Welcome to Dune Chapter by Chapter. I'm Dominic. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing Chapter 2. So I did the read-through in the last video, and I'm just going to recap Chapter 2 quickly. So in Chapter 2, we're introduced to the Harkonnens, and we're introduced to Vladimir, the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, his nephew Fade Ryutha, and his mentat Piter de Vries. And so in this chapter, the Baron and Piter are discussing the plans they have to destroy House Atreides. And Fade is there. The Baron wants him there because Fade is getting groomed to replace the Baron. That's the Baron's chosen one that's going to replace him and take on the barony of House Harkonnen. And so in this chapter, that's basically what they're doing, is discussing the plans and laying out the plans for Fade of how they're going to use Arrakis as a man trap to trap the Atreides and destroy their enemies once and for all. So what I like about this chapter is it really shows how evil the Harkonnens are. It's a great introduction to the Harkonnens, how scheming, how cutthroat, how backstabby the Harkonnens really are. And in this chapter, we get into a lot of the scheming, the backstabbing, the cutthroat political nature of Dune that I really like. You get a good taste of that in this chapter, because they're discussing this plan to destroy House Atreides. So their plan is, when House Atreides goes to Arrakis, the Emperor has basically ordered that House Atreides is going to take over Arrakis, and they're going to give it up. So the Harkonnens are going to lose their rights to Arrakis from harvesting spice. And so House Atreides are going to take it because it's going to give them immense power. But it's a trap. So House Harkonnen now has a spy implanted within House Atreides that will betray House Atreides and allow the Harkonnens to ambush them. And so the Harkonnens they have a very dangerous alliance going on with the Emperor. So the Emperor wants to get rid of Duke Leto, because Duke Leto is becoming very popular in the Landsraad, and he could threaten the Emperor's position of power. So he wants to get rid of Duke Leto, and so does House Harkonnen. So they form like a secret alliance to get rid of the Atreides. So the Emperor is going to give the Baron, a bunch of his Sardaukar soldiers, and they're going to be disguised as Harkonnen soldiers, and they're going to wipe out House Atreides for the Harkonnens, and so their alliance they'll both get something out of it. They'll get rid of the Emperor will get rid of his political competition, and the Harkonnens will get rid of, their ancient enemy and get Arrakis back. So that's basically the plan in a nutshell. Now, what I like about this chapter, and I really get a kick out of it whenever I read this chapter, is as they're discussing these plans, they're all got kind of plans of their own, like plans within plans. So the Baron is he's becoming wary of his own mentat, because Piter is really twisted and demented and is a real psychopath. He is like so evil and so devious that even the Baron is starting to kind of fear him a bit, because he even says to himself, he's getting too, I got to do something about this guy, this mentat of mine. He's getting way too devious. He's way too, even for me, he's getting too far gone. Like he's becoming a danger even to me. At some point, when I don't need him anymore, I have to get rid of him and get another mentat. But Piter knows this because he is a mentat, so he knows that as long as he can keep himself useful to the Baron, he'll stay alive. And to illustrate how twisted and sick he is, the Baron, points out, like, you're basically, you do way too many drugs, you consume way too much spice, you're into this Samuda stuff too, and maybe I was too quick to promise you the spoils of Arrakis. And then Piter gets all bent out of shape. No, you promised me to Lady Jessica. And then the Baron asks, for what? And Piter doesn't answer. So it's just left up to your imagination. Like, what would he have done to this woman if he had gotten his mitts on her? Who only knows, right? Your mind has to fill in the blanks. Just kind of, I like that, pretty effective writing by Frank Herbert. And so House Harkonnen has this, secret alliance with the Emperor that no other house can find out about. Because if the other houses find out that the Emperor is teaming up with another house to overthrow someone, they'll all the Landsraad will team up and destroy the Emperor. So it's dangerous for both parties to do that. And now in this chapter, they mention the Sardaukar. So that's like the murderous, fanatic soldiers of the Emperor. And we'll learn more about them later in the book. But they're really feared throughout the Imperium. And so now House Harkonnen, they have a spy planted in House Atreides, which is Dr. Yue. So now Dr. Yue is a Suk doctor, and he has Imperial Conditioning. So what Imperial Conditioning means, he's been conditioned to perform his duties as a doctor, and it's basically a sign that he's safe. So if you're a leader of a great house, or even the Emperor himself, you can let this doctor, tend to you or administer to you, and you don't have to worry about him assassinating you on behalf of another house. That's what it means. And not even under physical torture can this conditioning be broken. But the Harkonnens have found a way to break Dr. Yui's Imperial Conditioning. So that's interesting too. So now, the other thing that comes up again in this chapter is Chom. So I want to explain a little bit about what I think Chom is. Now, when I read the book, what I think of Chom, because it's kind of a hard thing to kind of wrap your head around a bit, but Chom is an acronym. So now this is going to be a mouthful when I say this. The Combined Honnête Ober Advancer Merchantiles. So that's what it stands for. And how I think of Chom is, I think of it, just say if Amazon was the only company in the world, and all the governments of the world all did all their business buying and selling, and all the people, all individuals and everything, did all their buying and selling through Amazon, and all the governments of the world and all leaders of the world had stock bought in Amazon. That's how I kind of think of Chom, and that's how I kind of understand it within my own mind. Now, I don't know how far off the mark I am with that, but that's basically how I think of it. And the Landsraad they kind of act like, almost like the UN, how the UN is a collection of states. Well, the Landsraad is similar, but it's a collection of feudal houses instead of states. And so each house has shares in Chom. And the more shares you have in Chom, the more political power you have. So Chom is really where all the political power is amongst the great houses. Now, another thing in this chapter, we really get a good look at what the Mentats are through Piter. So the Mentats were a result of the Butlerian Jihad. So in this time, no one is allowed to make any machines that can think. That's forbidden. So in replace of computers, they have Mentats. So Mentats are humans whose minds have been trained to such an extent that they basically can act like a human computer. Well, what's interesting about this chapter is the Baron points out the flaw in a Mentat to his nephew. He basically gets his Mentat to perform for his nephew. Do your Mentat calculations, run this plan through, run through this whole plan for my nephew. So Piter does, and so he's basically on display. So he's pointing out, yes, the Mentat can do this and do that, but at the same time, look how much spice he consumes. Look what he wants to do with the Lady Jessica. He's still chained to his passions. Don't mistake for 1 second, even though he thinks like a computer, he acts like a computer, he is still a human, and he still has human flaws. And he points that out as they're going through the plan. He points out that Piter said that House Atreides would have produced a daughter, but they didn't. They produced a son. So he was wrong. And then for the first time, Piter became afraid because, if he's wrong, he tells the Baron, I'm not often wrong, Baron, give me that. I'm not often wrong. Because he knows if he's wrong too much, he's no longer a use to the Baron, and he's done. So, when Paul came along, he really threw a monkey wrench into everyone's plans. Because the Bene Gesserit, they wanted House Atreides to have a daughter so they can wed that daughter to a Harkonnen. I'm assuming it's Fade. So the daughter of House Atreides would have been wedded to Fade Rautha, and then the next child that they had would have been a boy, and then that would have been Kwisatz Haderach that the Bene Gesserit would have been able to control. And then this joining between these two houses probably would have given them enough power that they could have overthrown the Emperor, or took the Emperor's place. And so the Bene Gesserit would have had control of the Empire then, because they would have had their male Bene Gesserit on the seat of power that they were controlling. But where Paul came along a generation too early, it throws everything right off, and it does kind of work out the way they had planned, but not. It works out the way they wanted. It works out the way, I guess, the way they kind of works out the way they wanted it, but not the way they wanted it, if that makes sense. And so that's what the mentats are. So now they mention Canley in this chapter. So what Canley is, it's basically a form of warfare that has very strict rules around it, so innocent people aren't killed. So this was laid out in what's known as the Great Convention. That basically the Great Convention was where they laid out all the rules for society or civilization going forward after the Great Butlerian Jihad. And so one of the main rules of Canley is no atomics. No house can use atomics on another house. And so it's warfare by very strict rules. That's laid out. Those rules have been laid out in the Great Convention. So now we also get a look at the relationship between the Empire and the Spacing Guild, because they mention how the Empire, or how the Spacing Guild is outside the control of the Empire. And the only kind of pull the Emperor has with the Spacing Guild is through bribes. So if they want to move assassins and spies here and there throughout space to other planets, they have to bribe the guild with spice to turn a blind eye. So you kind of have that underbelly going on there. And the guild can sit outside Imperial control because they're the only ones that can make spaceflight possible. So they have an absolute monopoly on spaceflight, the Spacing Guild. The only other thing that could take a guild member's place is a thinking machine, and but that's forbidden because of the Great Jihad. You can't make AI, so we have the Spacing Guild. And now the other thing is in this chapter that's kind of taken for granted is the Baron is not revealed until the end of this chapter. He's concealed in shadows the whole chapter until the very end. He comes out and he's revealed to be immensely, grossly fat, and he wears these suspensors on himself to reduce his weight. So he might, like it says in the book, he weighs he could weigh 200 kilos, and his body, his feet would carry no more than 50 because of the suspensor harnesses, the suspensors they have harnessed to his skin. So now this is something that's kind of interesting, because from what I got from reading the book, Baron got this way through overindulgence and greed. That's how he got so big. Just a lifestyle of overindulgence. That's how he got so fat, and the way he is. Overindulgence in everything. But that was kind of retconned. Now, I'm not sure if this is a retcon or not, but I think it is. I think Frank Herbert's original intent was he was supposed to get this way through overindulgence. But Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, when they did the prequel books, spoilers if you haven't read them, the Baron, the Gaius Helen Mohim wants to conceive a child with the Baron Harkonnen. So the Bene Gesserit force the Baron to do it. The Baron doesn't want to do it, and he doesn't like being controlled by the Bene Gesserit. He really absolutely despises it. So when it comes time for them to copulate, he viciously and brutally rapes her. So he makes it as horrible for her as possible because they're forcing him to do this. So, but as a result, she releases a sexually transmitted disease into him without him knowing it, because the Bene Gesserit, in those books, it's explained that they have all these sexually transmitted viruses in their body lying dormant, that anytime they want, they can activate one and transmit it onto someone they don't like. So that's what she did to the Baron, and he got this way because of the type of STD she gave him. Now, I think that's a retcon. I don't know, but if anyone knows if it is a retcon or knows the difference between the two, let me know in the comments section. So the other thing in this chapter, it really illustrates the difference between Fade and Paul. So Fade, he's shown to be very impatient in this chapter. Where in the first chapter, Paul is shown to be very patient. He's very disciplined. He's got a very disciplined mind, disciplined body. So disciplined that he could pass this test that would have killed any other normal person, the Gom Jabbar. Where Fade is shown as, he doesn't have the same disciplined mind as Paul. He's like the opposite of Paul. He just is power hungry. He can't wait to get all the Baron's power. He even refers to him as the old monster. He can't wait to get in there and seize all that power for himself. And he has no patience. He doesn't want to learn anything from his uncle. He just wants to go right to the seat of power right away. He doesn't want to hear about all these, how they got to this point. He just wants to hear where the real power is going to be. And the Baron mentions that, my nephew wants to, rule my barony one day, but he can't rule himself. He's still being controlled by his passions. And so he's almost like the opposite of Paul. So he's a good, counterpoint, a good foil for Paul, to illustrate how, because they're both roughly the same age, to illustrate how disciplined Paul is to how undisciplined Feyd is. So that's an interesting thing in the chapter, interesting comparison between the two. So that's pretty much everything I like about this chapter. I like the politics. It's one of the big things about Dune I really like. Just to say it again, I like the cutthroat nature of it, how they're always plotting and scheming and to get rid of one another and always plotting to get more power and cut the other guy's throat. And even the good characters do this. There's not really any good guys, like in traditional, in other forms of media, like Star Wars, where Luke Skywalker is firmly the good guy. But in this, even Paul turns out not to be the best guy. It's all shades of gray. But definitely the Harkonnens are much more, the most evilest guys in this book that you can think of. They're way out there on the scale of evil. And so one thing I wanted to kind of end off with was a question. And because when I read this book, I always wondered, why did the Duke accept Arrakis when he knows? Because it's implied, it's because the Atreides know that Arrakis is a trap. They say it in this chapter, and it's mentioned again in the book. They know that if they go to Arrakis, this is a trap set up by the Harkonnens and the Empire. They know this. The Atreides know this, but they're going to do it anyway. So why would the Duke do this if he knows it's a trap? So my reasoning is I think that he's going to do it anyway because if they can go there and avoid this trap, the payoff is going to be huge. Huge. It's going to get Duke Leto the position of Emperor. And it's going to get them immense wealth, way more control in Chom and stuff like that. Even though it's extremely dangerous, the gamble is, in his mind, the gamble is worth it. But I always kind of wondered that. If he just had, no, okay, we don't want Arrakis and just stayed there, it would have been good. Or maybe they didn't have a choice. Maybe when the Emperor gives that order, you have to do it, maybe. I don't know. But that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one.